In this video, we asked the question, can you really steal from yourself? I don't think so, but I also had to cite myself in college once, so I guess you can never be too sure. With Eric Kripke being the showrunner for both Supernatural and The Boys, there was bound to be some overlap, so let's look at all the things from Supernatural that carried over to The Boys, and major spoilers for both shows. Now, let's start at the beginning for both. So Huey joins the boys because A-Train turned his girlfriend into chunky soup, and Sam and his brother track down the demon Azazel because other ladies in their lives have also been unalived by much more powerful forces than them. But that theme of revenge carries even further through both stories. Duh, I just mentioned a major one, but Butcher's revenge is the entire reason that the boys are even back as a group. And then on the Supernatural side, Dean has a multiple season arc starting in season 9 where he searches for Gadriel out of revenge, and then in season 11 he tells Amara that revenge isn't worth it. Butcher, on the other hand, seems too hardened to ever admit that he's wrong or stop, but Huey's at least seem to come around. For how long though, we still have to wait and see. Now, both series have a strong and diverse cast of characters, and for Supernatural's case, having 15 seasons definitely helps with that, but in both shows, our two main characters, Butcher and Huey, and Dean and Sam, we get a very similar dynamic. In his original pitch for Supernatural, Kripke had likened Dean and Sam's dynamic to Luke Skywalker and Han Solo, and you can definitely look at Huey as a sort of Luke/generic hero guy archetype. But for Butcher, well, for him, it seems more like anything that he does good is either an accident or a cover for him to do something truly diabolical. Then there's the mentor/mentee angle for both sets of characters too, as Dean is the one who has to show Sam the, well, supernatural, and Butcher has to show Huey that the Supes aren't actually the beacons of goodness that they portray themselves as, which leads into the next similarity. So when you think of angels, you usually think of one of two things: a winged figure with a halo from heaven, or a disturbing collection of shapes that would scar anyone for life, no matter how many "do not be afraid" they try and spit out. But in both situations, angels are usually depicted as the good guys, unable to commit atrocities, but both Supernatural and The Boys do away with those typical characterizations. Supernatural's angels are more straightforward, depicted all the way from morally gray like Castiel to straight up villains like Naomi and Metatron. On The Boys' side, it's less exactly members of the army of God being jerks, and more like Supes are almost worshipped and revered as angels, with Vought and now Stan Edgar being God. Both show these generally depicted good guys as far more morally gray and allows there to be growth both positively and negatively, but hey, growth makes for some interesting characters to follow. Now let's look at two more specific comparisons, Castiel and Starlight. So both of these characters start off very loyal to their beliefs, and very quickly, those beliefs get weakened. For Starlight, it's a much faster degradation of her beliefs, but I feel like you can just chalk that up to Castiel being thousands of years old at that point, and if changing your mind after you're like 30 is a big pain, imagine being 3,000 years old. The reason for their change in beliefs, though, are very different and have more to do with the different ideas of faith in general. Castiel knows that God exists, but is disillusioned with him after he finds out that he wants nothing to do with him, which is weird since he kept reviving him, but you know, things change. Starlight, on the other hand, has a more human belief, and because of the things she suffered and by finding out that she got her powers from a test tube and not the divinity, it makes sense. Hopefully, she doesn't decide to go on a villain arc, but we'll have to wait and see. But the critique of Fundamentalist Christianity isn't just confined to those two characters. In both shows, they show different people using faith and religion as a way to advance themselves, but mainly it's just to dupe people. In Supernatural's first season, we see that with the Reaper-powered faith healer, and then we later find out that there's actually no human faith healers at all. Then in The Boys' first season, we see the Believe Expo, which is just what you'd expect from an event named like that, and just like with the faith healers, Ezekiel is really just taking advantage of those who buy into what he's selling, but I think that the way some people look at the Supes as gifts from God, specifically Homelander, look at them in a very messianic way. I mean, look at how he just floats here. And as anyone who watched The Boys know, he's not a good guy by any stretch of the imagination. But the Christian religion and those that use it to grift aren't the only things that both these shows love to critique, because your corporate overlords might even be worse, but who am I to talk? Anyway, the angels all have a very strong businessy vibe to them, especially Metatron, and do the same thing as Vought by marketing themselves as the benevolent protectors of humanity. Obviously, they're just doing that because they each have different agendas, and while I don't think it's worth arguing whether superpowered entities bent on controlling the world to enact the apocalypse, or a corp that creates superpowered entities bent on controlling the world through brand deals is worse, it is pretty easy to see the overlap. Vought hasn't destroyed the world yet though, so I guess points to them. Now, if you're gonna try and amass an army of super soldiers to carry out your plans, are you gonna try and recruit them, or just make them yourself? Well, both the demons and angels thought that manipulating families and putting demons' blood in children respectively were a great idea, and Vought is just making superpower babies as often as they can. The old adage of starting them young seems to be a key motivation here, but in the boys' comics, this was also a thing that happened, so it's not like it was created solely for this adaptation. Still, having your plan based on modified children is definitely a supervillain type of move, really no matter the outcome. But the bad childhoods don't just stop at babies being used to fight wars and to sell merch. Dean and Sam's childhood was filled with their mom out of the picture because demons had to be demons, and their dad with PTSD turned them into hunters, which, sure, that turned out to be a good thing in the end, but that doesn't mean it was fun for either of them. On the boys' side, almost every character we see had a bad childhood. Homelander was an experiment, which means he didn't even really have a childhood. Starlight seems to have some problems with her mom even before she finds out that her life was a lie, and even Huey and his dad have a weird tension between them. The only other characters who might not have had a bad childhood in the boys are the characters that we just haven't gotten too much backstory on yet, like Queen Maeve, but I honestly doubt that she had the best formative years either. Okay, now let's talk about something that wouldn't alert Child Protective Services: park benches. Going back to the Castiel and Starlight comparison, they both really like to have their character-defining moments on those things. When Huey and Starlight first meet, it's on a bench, and then their conversation leads her to finding out where her powers actually come from, and the bench becomes a reoccurring spot for them. In Supernatural, when Castiel opens up to Dean about his real feelings about being an angel and his doubt in God, it's on a, you guessed it, park bench. Again, the boys' version is a carbon copy from the comics, but it's just too much of a coinky-dink that Kripke set up both of these character-defining moments in the same way. Finally, let's talk about the soundtracks of both shows. Kripke loves his bands, and he made sure that they would be able to get some shine in both series, one way or another. The only difference is how it's translated. So in Supernatural, classic rock is the main go-to as it's one of Kripke's favorites, with bands like Rush and AC/DC being used, while in The Boys, we get notable cuts from Billy Joel as one of Huey's favorite artists. But when looking at his choice of band tees, we see that he's also wearing an AC/DC shirt. The significance of the songs used even come out in the character's disposition. Dean's brash and aggressive in a way that fits perfectly in the genre, while Huey is a mellow guy who probably wouldn't even hurt a fly. Until he blew that guy up, but accidents happen. Even Mother's Milk follows in this with wearing shirts repping Run DMC, Wu-Tang, and De La Soul. Here's hoping for an MF Doom reference in season 3. I feel like it's the perfect crossover. Or we could just have a song play too, I'm not that picky. When a creator who knows what they like is given the reins to a project, you know there's gonna be some homages and parallels, and with Kripke, you can tell that he has a vision and he's gonna stick to it. With Supernatural done, we'll have to wait and see what else he's got in store for season 3 of The Boys. And something, it's not stealing, it's just borrowing from your past self.